Let's jump right in. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really unflinching dive into a fascinating but, often unseen narrative. We all know the standard textbook story of the Industrial Revolution, right? It's usually framed as this triumphant tale of brilliant inventors and towering machines. But today, we're going to look at the hidden engine of this era. We're going to examine the deeply intertwined realities of empire, iron, and the profound human cost that actually powered this whole global transformation. Okay, let's dive into this. Was the Industrial Revolution really just about James Watt, steam power, individual genius, and unstoppable human progress? Textbooks absolutely love to celebrate the gleaming machinery and the sudden wealth it generated for the new middle class. But to truly understand the mechanics of this era, well, we need to brace ourselves and look at what you might call the iceberg model of history. So, what we usually see above the water is the myth. It's that highly visible, celebrated progress at the very top of society. We see unprecedented wealth, incredible mechanical ingenuity, and grand, glittering showcases like the Crystal Palace. But below the surface, holding all of that prosperity up, there was a grim, invisible human reality at the bottom. We're talking about a foundation literally built on enslaved labor, deeply toxic mines, and a relentless system of brutal colonial extraction. Let's zoom in from those massive macro-level marvels to the micro-level human suffering required to produce just a single piece of infrastructure. If we trace the life of just one iron railway bolt, the journey is honestly staggering. First, the ore was extracted from pitch-black, toxic mines. Then it was forged into shape by workers enduring grueling, unrelenting 14-hour shifts. And finally, it was laid down into tracks by displaced, severely underpaid laborers. They were often referred to as navvies, and they lived in absolutely terrible transient conditions. Now, hold that single bolt in your mind for a second. And let's multiply it. 3,000. That is the staggering number of tons of raw materials needed to lay down just one single mile of mid-19th century railway track. To put that into perspective, imagine the sheer volume of grueling manual labor required to extract, transport, and assemble that much iron and wood. And remember, they were doing this all without the help of any modern excavation equipment or logistics networks. It's a heavy realization, but the physical, steel backbone of Britain's revolution was built directly upon the broken bodies of domestic miners and laborers. Underground, miners lived under the constant, terrifying threat of sudden cave-ins, methane explosions, and flooding, not to mention the slow violence of toxic coal dust inhalation. Above ground, workers faced those unrelenting 14-hour factory shifts we talked about. And tragically, children, who were prized just because of their small size, were forced into the workforce. They literally risked their lives cleaning and operating dangerous, fast-moving, tight machinery. The domestic human toll was horrific. But the gears of this massive industrial machine didn't just grind down workers within Britain's own borders. No. To truly feed the furnaces of progress, those gears had to reach much, much further. They stretched across oceans, connecting entire continents. And this brings us to the climax of our narrative, the global, deeply colonial web of the textile industry. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that Manchester wasn't just a thriving, bustling city. It was the hungry, beating center of a vast global web. It actually earned the nickname Cottonopolis because of its staggering global dominance and the incredibly ambitious scale of its cotton textile production. I mean, this is what made Britain the undisputed manufacturing powerhouse of the entire world. But here is the incredible paradox that really defines this whole era. By 1850, the British Empire controlled nearly half, 40%, of the entire global cotton trade. Yet because of its cold, damp climate, Britain couldn't grow a single cotton plant on its own soil. So how on earth did an island nation achieve such monumental control over an industry that relied on a crop it couldn't even grow? And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how they did it. The answer lies in a ruthlessly efficient, exploitative imperial supply chain. Essential raw materials were systematically sourced through global exploitation. The cotton came flowing in from the American South and India, cultivated largely by enslaved and coarse labor. The sugar that literally fueled the British workforce came from enslaved people in the Caribbean. Even the cochineal dye, the stuff used for those iconic red British Army uniforms, was extracted via coerced labor from Spanish territories. To ensure a steady, uninterrupted flow of these materials, the British Empire engineered what is known as a monocrop economy around the globe.
Basically, they coerced colonial territories into specializing in a single export crop. This was a highly calculated strategy that deliberately degraded local food security, making these regions entirely captive and dependent on British imports. They were effectively turned into subservient, trapped cogs in the larger British industrial machine.
The contrasts within this system are profoundly jarring. Just think about it. On one side, you have wealthy British mill owners in cities like Leeds and Manchester generating massive, unprecedented profits, building grand suburban estates, and flaunting their new respectability. On the exact opposite side, enslaved people were enduring unimaginable violence, terror, and exhaustion across the Atlantic just to supply the raw cotton. The immense wealth of this new middle class was directly, undeniably tethered to transatlantic suffering. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this system of absolute control wasn't just economic, it was built into the very physical technologies of the era. We often celebrate railways, telegraph lines, and steel-clad warships purely as miracles of modern engineering, right? But in reality, they were deployed as highly effective instruments of colonial control. Railways carved deep into territories to extract resources with terrifying efficiency. Telegraphs swiftly transmitted imperial orders, and those warships projected global power to protect these highly lucrative extractive trade routes. Ultimately, it all boils down to one undeniable reality, perfectly captured right here. Industrialization and empire were not just intertwined, they were inseparable. Think about that for a second. Without the immense raw materials drawn from its vast empire, Britain's magnificent steam-powered engines and churning factories would have completely ground to a halt. The empire didn't just participate in the Industrial Revolution, it was the lifeblood that kept the machine alive. So, the crucial point is that this history isn't just locked away in the 19th century. The colonial extractive blueprint we've been looking at, that relentless drive for cheap materials and maximized production, it actually birthed the complex modern global supply chains and the mass consumer culture that we all rely on today. The fundamental logic of the industrial system, it hasn't disappeared, it's just evolved into the modern era.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to really chew on. When we look at the incredible conveniences of our modern global supply chains, the technology we use every day, the clothes we wear, stuff delivered to our doors in days, who is paying the invisible human cost today? The engine of industry is still running, and it's really up to us to recognize the unseen labor that powers our world. Thanks so much for diving into this with me.